right, let's keep the chat going here with my next guest, another great friend of the show, media analyst and political commentator Stephanie Hamill. Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on the U.S. Report. Now, big news in the last few hours. The hated leader of Hamas is dead, Yahya Sinwar, and his Washington Post obituary has already dropped, referencing his hard-scrabble upbringing, calling him resolute, and so on. This feels a bit like the time they called Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi an austere religious scholar. What do you make of it, Stephanie?
You know, I'm not surprised that this dropped today. As you pointed out, the Washington Post did refer to the ISIS leader as an austere scholar, which was totally reprehensible then. And then once again, it's almost like they're glorifying this evil, evil man. If you read through the article, it's almost like they're not talking about a man who was a leader and the person behind the murdering of over 1,200 Jewish people, the kidnapping of grandmas and babies. It is truly despicable.
I couldn't say it better myself, Stephanie. Now, I want to move on to the big interview with Bret Baier we had the other day, and particularly this detail that emerged after the interview, namely that Harris apparently arrived late and her team tried to cut the interview off short. Here's a little of what Bret Baier had to say.
And you've been on the other side. You've been on the rapper as a press secretary interviewing a president. And, you know, I'm talking like 4 people waving their hands like it's got to stop. So, Martha, final, I had to dismount there at the end.
Stephanie, what did you make of that? I thought that was pretty obvious that they were trying to end it and run out the clock almost like it was the last quarter of a football game.
As a viewer, you did get the sense that there was a hard rap going on behind the scenes, the old hand wave and circle going on, because it seemed uncomfortable for the host. And it is just totally disrespectful that they showed up so late, knowing the timeline that the show had to turn this interview around. I will say that Bret Baier, he did a fantastic job on asking some of the most important questions that the American voters want to know about, which is immigration and the economy. And I was just like jaw dropped that VP Harris didn't come in fully prepared for this interview. It wasn't that hard. There weren't really any gotchas going on there. Bret Baier asked her fair questions on relevant issues, and she still didn't want to take this opportunity to answer those for the American people. To me, this suggests a few things. She either is unaware of the issues, or she doesn't want people to know where she really stands on the issues. And so at this point in the campaign, I mean, it's just totally appalling. At one point in the interview, she told the viewers to go read about her views and policies instead of using this time to explain it to those who were tuning in. Now, of course, is she going to change the minds of the hardcore Harris supporters? Not at all. They don't care. They thought she did a fantastic job. Is she going to change the minds of Trump supporters? Absolutely not. But it will give them more ammo, if you will, when it comes to proving that she is not qualified to be president. But it's the independent voters that she had an opportunity to talk to directly on this program. And instead, she treated it like a deposition. She started getting visibly angry and irritated by these basic questions coming from the host.
Well, yeah, and in fact, actually, there was one moment where she really seemed to, well, basically lose it. Have a look at this.
Talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the president of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it.
What did you make of that? I thought that was a pretty strange flex, talking about putting people in jail when, you know, one of Trump's chief strategists is behind bars right now.
Well, again, she's lying. That's not actually what Donald Trump said. And Bret Baier was trying to point to that. So, again, she was using this as a time to gaslight the American people, continuously lie about Donald Trump. She brought his name up 20 times during this interview instead of talking about herself and how she could make your life better. And what Donald Trump actually said, if you look at the video, he was talking about what would happen after the election if there was mass protest and rioting going on. He was saying that those people would have to face the law. He didn't say which side. He didn't say, oh, we're going to go after Kamala Harris supporters. That's just not true. But this is what always happens to Donald Trump. The media and the left take him out of context, and then they write these headlines, and then they regurgitate the talking points on the mainstream media, and they just hope that people aren't, smart enough to look into it for themselves instead of just believing what is being said.
And what do you think about this with her broader media strategy? Because it's like, they hid her away for so long, and now she's doing everything. She's even doing Fox News. She's done the really raunchy sex podcast, Call Her Daddy. Is this desperation, or is there a method to all of this?
You get a sense that there's a little desperation in the air, that things aren't going as well as they had hoped, that their internal polling must be pretty bad if they feel like they had to bring her out, because initially the strategy was just to keep her in the basement and not have her talk at all, and just hope that all the hype would be enough to get her across the finish line. Then they saw the polling and then realized that, they needed a little bit more of a bump, because Donald Trump is doing significantly well, especially considering everything this man has been through. He's been impeached, all the legal lawfare against him, the assassination attempts on his life, and the mainstream media, which is very much against him for the most part. So he's had a very uphill battle, if you will. And Harris, she's had everything handed to her on a platter. Not one single voter actually voted for her. She's the most unvetted candidate in recent time. It's insanity. So I think the polling's not going where they want it to go, which is why we saw this media blitz over the past 2 weeks. And the expectation that this was going to help her is a little ludicrous, because they thought it was going to help her, and then actually it's not helping at all. We haven't seen a spike in the polls, and in fact, it might be backfiring, because again, Harris lacks substance, and it's either by design or she just doesn't have what it takes to be the next president of the United States.
Yeah, I suspect it's the latter there, Stephanie, but just sticking on the media, some of the press seems to keep getting into trouble trying to give her a lift. CBS still hasn't released the transcript from that 60 Minutes episode, which we talked about last week on this program, where they seem to give her a whole different answer to make her sound better. And now Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, he has accused CNN, or CBS rather, of selectively editing an answer about hurricane relief in North Carolina. It seems to me like there's a systemic problem with some parts of the press, not just, having their own biases, but actually really actively trying to put their finger on the scale.
I am young enough to remember when CBS was a credible news organization. In fact, I worked for one of their affiliates. That was my first job as a TV news reporter in Yuma, Arizona. And I really looked up to the national host. What is happening right now is proving to be that this news organization is more like a propaganda machine and an arm of the Democratic Party. And the fact that they won't release the transcripts is so revealing. It's either they did a bad and unethical job with the interview, or that Harris completely fell flat on her face and they were trying to boost her, or maybe both. But this could all be resolved if they just release the transcripts, which is not, out of the ordinary. That's what news networks do when they have sit-down interviews with important political people. And this is the person who could potentially be leading our country. You know what I mean? It's not. This isn't something that should be private.